Hey everybody, it's Sandel here, ready to talk about block formatting. Now, you may not know that there was a time long ago where the block format wasn't so popular on the circuit. In fact, it was unknown as early as January 2019. Before then, it was the age of the CWEI or CWDI or CHWDI. Point being, the acronym, the letters, that got a little messy at times. But the idea was that you would give a claim, you'd give a warrant to explain that claim, you'd give some evidence to back it up, and then you'd give an impact of that claim without using evidence. That was your argument. You listed that, you did it 2, maybe 3 times if you were really feeling spicy, and that was your speech. Pair it with an intro conclusion. Done deal. We're done here. In 2019, I had a student named Rohit Chawar. The idea was that CWI wasn't quite as in-depth into argumentation as we wanted it to be. We couldn't get as far into the topics, into the debates, into the bills as we hoped we could get. And Rohit was restricted by it. It was around Emory when we decided that we wanted to branch out, do something else. We started with just writing out blocks, nuanced blocks, paragraphs that explained the evidence, explained the argument in more depth. It worked pretty well at Emory. Then we took it again and we used it at Stanford. It worked really well at Stanford, so we tried it again at Berkeley. Not as well over at Berkeley, but then we replicated it again with some more modifications, more in depth, trying to string the blocks together into one uniform meaning, and that's when he did really well at Tournament of Champions. We took it a step further and said, let's just try to make it one whole argument, which is linked together blocks. He won the national title, the Senate, in June of 2019, and that's how the block format was born. And back then, everybody used CWI. Now we see a lot of this one argument structure utilized a lot more often. I wanted to go in depth into this one argument structure known as the block format so as many people as possible can hear it, understand it, and hopefully we see even more of a boost in argumentation across the entire national circuit. So let's get into it. The first part of the block format is the status quo block. The second part is the outcome block. And the third part is the impact block. So those are the 3 blocks making up block format. We're not going to talk about intros or conclusions today. We're just going to talk about those 3 blocks. Status quo, otherwise known as SQUO, outcome block, which you just call outcome, and the impact block, which you can call impact. We're going to first break down that status quo block. Now, if we're trying to persuade anyone of anything, the first thing you need to do is explain something that's happening right now. For example, if you wanted to explain to a parent why you should, let's say, be able to go out at night, push your curfew back an hour, you're not going to start off with the change or the impacts of the change. You're going to start off with explaining how you're doing really well in school right now, how you have straight A's, how you're just killing the game, doing everything that your parents want you to do. You're going to explain why the status quo is going so well so that you dictate a reward. In life, we start off most things with explaining the status quo. To those of you with younger siblings or maybe a teaching job or something that you actually have to, some type of role where you have to explain something to somebody younger than you, where you have to teach something, what we do is we use block format all the time. And the basic way of teaching somebody to break a habit or learn something new is you start off by first saying, hey, we think there's a problem with the way you're doing it right now. If you want a 3-year-old to stop putting their shoes on the wrong way, you're going to start off by explaining that when they put the wrong shoe on the wrong foot, it leads to some discomfort, some pain even. There's a reason to inspire change, which is the block format. That's the status quo block. The whole idea of it is it's supposed to inform the judges of your argument. So a key thing about the SQUO block, it is the first thing that comes up when you're delivering the block format, a block format case, but it is not the first thing you come up with when it comes to your argument. Your argument comes first. You think of what is my reason to affirm or negate this piece of legislation? Then we determine what is the best status quo block to go with that. The status quo block should be 3-ish sentences with hopefully just one piece of evidence, sometimes 2 in really extreme cases. For the most part, just one solid piece of evidence that explains the reason or your argument existing. So if we were to use an example, Let's take Tyler Liu, 2023 NSDA Senate Finals on a qualified immunity speech. In his status quo block, he gives this whole thing about how many people are being killed by police unarmed, and pairs that with this idea that this many states are offering police training right now, proper police training based on de-escalation techniques. That is the entire status quo block, explaining this key idea so that judges get a solid understanding that people are being hurt right now, and it's because police aren't being properly trained. That sets the framework for his argument. It explains why the argument exists. Now, what if we're on the negation? What is a solid status quo block that we could use for this exact same bill, except flip it over to the negation side? I would say solid status quo block for that would be an overall idea of how many police officers are police officers because of the protections of qualified immunity, paired with something about declining police office, the amount of police officers declining over the years, less people wanting to be a police officer due to either less protections or general public distrust of police officers. So these are both either the affirmation or negation, both of us. It gives us a reason for why our argument is going to exist when we get there. It allows the judges to understand it. So that's that status quo block. Get us to an idea of why we're here, why we're about to explain this argument, a key piece of information, insight into your argument, which brings us to the outcome, which has an action within it. The action is going to be where you start off. You're going to explain this legislation takes some type of action that's going to directly impact that status quo that we just talked about. So, Section 1 of this bill mandates that qualified immunity is no longer a thing for police officers. That's an action, right? That's going to directly impact the status quo. And there's no evidence here. You're just citing the piece of legislation. This is after that. You're just citing which part of the bill is going to impact that status quo that you're talking about. Which brings us to the outcome portion of the outcome block, the actual outcome. I want everybody to think about this. If there is an action taken in anything in life, there should be some reaction to it, otherwise known as an outcome to it of it. There's always going to be something that happens, something that comes of it. That is why the outcome block is so important. It's supposed to be now detailing. We said this action is going to affect the status quo. What actually happened? What affected it? What is the outcome of that effect? In Tyler's case, he argued that when you do this, more states are going to mandate de-escalation training so they can avoid lawsuits due to liabilities that would be associated with not having the trainings and without having qualified immunity. Very important there. That warranting, he provides evidence to back it up. Your outcome is not an outcome if it doesn't have evidence, because at the end of the day, you're a teenager. And judges don't just trust teenagers on their goodwill. They need some evidence to back it up. So evidence has to exist in the outcome block as well. That is if you are to have a speech that properly convinces the judges that you need to convince of your speech. So that right there in that block has the evidence. We have the outcome. We've explained what's going to happen. For the other side of it, so flipping that to the negation, if we were to take the same idea of the outcome and flip it to that negation status quo I gave you, we would still say this takes away qualified immunity, which is another layer of protection to police officers. And we talk about how I'll probably use that exact same evidence about how it increases liabilities and say when police officers don't feel properly protected, we lose the amount of police officers. And I would cite evidence about how when we don't have those police officers, when we don't have qualified immunity, we lose police officers. And that leaves us with a select few police officers, a certain kind of police officer, probably police officers who could go and get other jobs with more protections, the college educated police officers. So it leaves us with non-college educated police officers. So in one outcome block on the affirmation, we have a situation where we have proven to the judges that we're going to have increase in training and on negation, proven a scenario where we have less overall police officers. The police officers we have are more likely to be non-college educated, which brings us to our very last block. We call this the impact block. Very similar to the CWI impact block. The difference, we're going to use evidence in this impact block. We want to prove something with evidence in this impact block. And since it's a one argument speech, we have the time to do it. We're not just trying to fit in 2-3 arguments. And oftentimes when we do that, we sacrifice the evidence. So what we're going to do is we're going to add evidence here. So a refresher on what the impact is. The impact is once we have an outcome, we have established what this world looks like upon passing this legislation. It's going to look like in the qualified immunity example, it's either going to look like a world with more training, or in the other example, it's going to look like a world with these non-college educated police officers. And these are the two worlds that have been set up. And this is where we're going to go on our sales pitch. We need to convince the judges that our world is either a good thing if we're on the affirmation or a bad thing if we're on the negation. The world is a world you either want to live in or don't want to live in. This is the entire job of the impact. It's supposed to be your opinionated. It's supposed to sway your judges to one side, saying this world's either good or bad to live in. So in the qualified immunity example, Tyler gives you the affirmation example, Tyler gives you two key impacts. One, he talks about protecting police officers. When there's better training of police officers actually are safer. They get hurt less. They get violence inflicted upon them less, which is beneficial for them. And the second one, communities, there's less police brutality. Those are two solid impacts. And he's saying that this world is an amazing world because we're going to have a safer world, a more peaceful world, a world where police officers and community members alike are safer. That's how you sell judges on something. It's something that everybody can get behind, rally around it. It's community. And it's a direct result of the outcome block. So our impact block is just like, this is why the outcome is a good thing. So when Tyler says, hey, we're going to have better training is good because it protects communities and it protects police officers. It is a direct correlation. Because the outcome is true, this good thing happens. If I'm on the negation, I would say, because the outcome is true, this bad thing happens. So what would I say on that negation example? Well, I'd say when we have more non-college educated police officers, we see more police violence, and I would cite that towards communities. There's a ton of evidence backing this idea up, proving that so many of the big issues that stem from police violence come from the non-college educated police officers in particular, that they tend to have majority of the behavioral issues. If that is the case, by only increasing the total amount by increasing the percentage of non-college educated police officers in the police force, you are also asking for that increase in violence to happen with it. And that is a very bad thing. And I can say directly, because this outcome is true, because there is more non-college educated police officers, we can see this increase in violence. That's an impact. And that is something that judges can tangibly say is a bad thing, directly linked to the argument, because each link follows each other. This is what's going on right now. Then this legislation is going to change what's happening right now. And the outcome of that change will be this. The impact of that outcome is this. You don't want to live in that world. Or on the other side, you do want to live in that world. That's up to you as the debater to really pick your side and explain the good and bad in that impact block. This is the block format. 3 blocks: status quo, outcome, and impact. If each block works off of each other and each link perfectly fills this gap, you get an argument that makes sense logically, backed up by evidence, and can be really emotionally persuasive to your judges. So check the links, check the evidence, make sure you have a clear good and a clear bad depending on which side you're on, and I promise you, you're going to like your outcome. Thank you.